Jacob Miller sat in his office, his eyes scanning the quarterly reports, barely able to contain his satisfaction. Quantum Innovations wasn't just succeeding, it was dominating. 2 decades of relentless drive and sacrifice had brought him to the top, and he wasn't about to let anyone or anything knock him down. But just as his mind was relishing the triumph, his phone buzzed with an urgency he couldn't ignore. The hospital's number flashed on the screen. In an instant, the feeling of control vanished. "Mr. Miller, your son Ryan has been admitted with injuries. He's asking for you." Those words sent a shock through his system. One moment, Jacob was on top of the world, the next, everything he cared about was hanging by a thread. What could have happened to Ryan? How does a man who built an empire handle a crisis that hits him right at home? This is where Jacob's real battle begins. Stick around, because this story is just getting started. The drive to the hospital passed in a blur of honking horns and flashing lights. Jacob's thoughts churned with possibilities, a car crash, a fight maybe. Ryan wasn't usually one to be reckless, but at 19, anything could happen. When he finally walked into the emergency room, the sharp scent of disinfectant hit him, along with the constant beeping of machines and the low hum of voices. He spotted Ryan right away, hunched over on an exam table. The usual confidence in his son's eyes was gone, replaced by a look of vulnerability. His left arm was in a cast, and dark bruises were already forming on his face. "Dad," Ryan rasped, his voice hoarse and his eyes watery. Jacob crossed the room in 3 quick steps, gently placing a hand on Ryan's good shoulder. "What happened?" he asked quietly. Ryan swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing as he struggled to speak. I saw Mom. With Steve," he finally choked out. "In your bedroom." For a moment, Jacob's world tilted. His grip on Ryan's shoulder tightened, though his face stayed expressionless. He had built his business by never showing his emotions, and now that same skill was being put to the ultimate test. "Tell me everything," Jacob said, his voice low and controlled. Ryan's story came out in fragments, how he had walked in on his mother, Lisa, and their neighbor, Steve Thompson, tangled together in the bed Jacob had shared with her for 20 years. The shock, the confusion, his frantic attempt to call his father. Then Steve, drunk and angry, had confronted Ryan. In the struggle, Ryan's arm had been slammed against the doorframe, breaking it, and his own mother had helped Steve lock him in the guest room before they fled like criminals. As Ryan finished telling me, emotions churned inside, but I kept my face unreadable. Betrayal, searing anger that burned slowly in my gut, and concern for my son, he was the only one that mattered now. "I'll take care of this," I said, squeezing Ryan's shoulder gently, my voice steady. "You're safe now, and that's what's important." Ryan nodded, the tension easing slightly from his body. He trusted me completely. I'd always been a man of action, someone who got things done through sheer will. If I said I'd handle it, it would get handled. As I left the hospital, a plan was already taking shape in my mind. Something else gnawed at me. Ryan's injuries didn't seem as bad as he had made them out to be. Maybe he had exaggerated, but that wasn't my focus right now. All I could think about was confronting Lisa and Steve. As I drove home, the streets I'd known for years suddenly felt strange, almost hostile. The house loomed ahead, like a monument to 20 years of lies. Inside, the silence weighed heavy, like a thick fog pressing down. I moved through the house like a ghost, taking in the signs of Lisa's hasty departure, dresser drawers left wide open, hangers tossed across the floor of the closet. In our bedroom, the sheets were still crumpled, the scent of betrayal and cheap cologne hanging in the air. A quick look in my office confirmed my worst fears. The safe had been cleaned out, both cash and some critical documents gone. My jaw clenched. This wasn't just infidelity, it was outright theft. My instincts kicked in, instincts sharpened by years of ruthless business dealings. I drove straight to Steve's house. As I pulled up, there they were, Lisa and Steve, loading suitcases into his flashy sports car. They moved with the familiarity of longtime lovers, their betrayal on full display. Cold rage surged through me. My steps were slow, deliberate as I approached. "Going somewhere?" I called out, my voice slicing through the night like a whip. Lisa froze, her face a mixture of guilt and defiance. Steve, never the sharpest, tried to puff up his chest like he was going to intimidate me, but he crumbled under my icy glare. "Jake, please," Lisa stammered, her voice tight with fear. "It's not what you think," I didn't let her finish. My fist connected with Steve's jaw with a solid crunch. He staggered back, blood streaming from his split lip. "You broke my son's arm," I said, my voice chillingly calm. "Now I'm going to break you." What followed was a blur of fists and fury. Years of pent-up rage poured out of me as I laid into him. I barely heard Lisa's frantic screams or felt her weak attempts to pull me off. When I finally stepped back, Steve was crumpled on the driveway, groaning in pain. I turned to Lisa, my expression cold as stone. "We're done. Don't ever come back. You made your choice." As I walked away, I couldn't help but overhear pieces of their frantic conversation. Steve, still spitting blood, grumbled, "This wasn't part of the plan. We need those files." Lana hissed back, "Shut up, you idiot. He might hear us." My mind raced. Files? A plan? This went way beyond a crumbling marriage. They were after more than just my personal life, they were after my legacy, my life's work. The next morning, I found myself in a private conference room at Quantum Innovations, sitting across from Frank Harper. Frank wasn't just the company's legal counsel, he'd been my closest friend for as long as I could remember. His face was a mixture of concern and disbelief. "Jake, I'm so sorry about Lisa," he began, his voice heavy with emotion. "But something about all this doesn't sit right. Lisa's actions, they seem too calculated." I nodded, my mind still turning over the conversation I'd overheard. I shared the details with Frank as we discussed the upcoming divorce proceedings. Midway through, my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with an unknown number, and the message that followed sent a chill down my spine: "Back off, or everything you've built will come crashing down." Frank's face darkened as I showed him the text. "Jake, this is bigger than just cheating," he said, his voice low and serious. I leaned in and told him about the emptied safe and the missing documents. "They're not just after me, Frank. They're after Quantum. Someone's pulling the strings." Frank sat back in his chair, pressing his fingertips together in deep thought. "We need to be very careful," he warned. "If word of this gets out, shareholders could panic. A hostile takeover isn't out of the question." I clenched my fists, feeling the weight of the situation. Quantum Innovations wasn't just a company to me, it was my blood, sweat, and tears. I had built it from the ground up, from a garage project to a tech giant. No one was going to take that away from me. "We fight," I said, my voice thick with resolve. "We figure out who's behind this, and we bury them." Frank gave a grim smile. This was the me he knew best, driven, relentless, and unstoppable when cornered. "Where do we start?" he asked, already flipping open his legal pad, ready for the battle ahead. "We locked the company down," I replied, my thoughts firing on all cylinders. "Secure every sensitive project. Change every access code. Then, we follow the money. Lisa's been acting strange for months. There's got to be a trail leading us to whoever's orchestrating this." As we worked through our strategy, I felt a familiar fire flare up in my chest. This wasn't about saving face or patching up my broken marriage. This was war. And I didn't lose wars. "One more thing," I added, my voice dropping to a near growl. "I want them to suffer. Lisa, Steve, and whoever's pulling their strings, I want them to regret ever crossing me." Frank nodded, unfazed. He'd known me long enough to understand this wasn't about petty revenge. It was about justice, delivered my way. As we hammered out more details, neither of us noticed the tiny device blinking quietly under the table. Someone was listening, and the game was far from over. Jacob Miller's office was a fortress, steel and glass, just like the man himself. He sat behind his massive desk, fingers steepled, staring across at Ruby Winters. Her reputation as a private investigator was well known, discreet, thorough, and ruthless. Exactly the kind of ally I needed in this fight. "I need everything you can dig up on Steve Shelton and my soon-to-be ex-wife, Lisa," I said, my voice steady and cold. "Don't leave a single stone unturned." Ruby gave a curt nod, her eyes lighting up with professional intensity. "Consider it done, Mr. Miller. Anything specific you're after?" "Anything that doesn't make sense," I replied, leaning back. "I've got a gut feeling this is bigger than an affair." As Ruby left to start her investigation, I turned my attention to the financial reports scattered across my desk, though the numbers seemed to blur. My mind kept looping through the past few days, the betrayal, Ryan's injuries, the confrontation with Lisa and Steve. Every memory added fuel to the cold fire of rage building inside me. A knock at the door pulled me out of those dark thoughts. Lauren Stanley, my business partner and CEO of Quantum Innovations, stepped inside, his face tight with concern. Usually upbeat, Lauren now looked like he'd been up all night worrying. "Jake, we need to talk," he said, his voice unusually grim. "There are some financial discrepancies I can't explain." My eyes narrowed. "Show me." Lauren laid out the concerning figures, and with each number he pointed to, my suspicions hardened. This wasn't just Lisa's betrayal. This was corporate espionage. It was a calculated attack on everything I had built. "Lock it down," I ordered, my tone leaving no room for debate. "Change all the access codes, restrict the flow of information, and give me a list of everyone who's accessed our systems in the last 6 months." Lauren nodded, already pulling out his phone to start implementing the measures. "What about the board?" "They'll demand answers. They'll get them." "When I'm ready," I replied coolly. "For now, this stays between us." As Lauren hurried off, my phone buzzed with a message from Ruby, "Found something. Meet me at your house. Come alone, *." The drive home was a blur, my mind racing with strategies while the fury inside me simmered just below the surface. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed an unfamiliar car parked across the street, Ruby's, I guessed. Inside, I found her waiting in my office, her face grim. "You're not going to like this, Mr. Miller," she said. "I already don't like any of it," I snapped. "What did you find?" Ruby held up a small device, no bigger than a button. "This was hidden in your desk lamp. High-end tech, live audio feed. I'm willing to bet there are more of these planted around the house." My blood ran cold before fury surged through me. They'd been spying on me, listening to everything inside my own home. "And there's more," Ruby continued. "Steve Shelton has a record, fraud, and there's suspicion he's tied to organized crime. And Lisa, she's been making large cash withdrawals from your joint account for months." My jaw tightened. This wasn't just a betrayal of our marriage. This was a full-scale attack on my life, personally, professionally, and financially. Ruby had uncovered the ugly truth, but now it was up to me to finish it. "We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars," Ruby said, her words hanging in the air like a heavy weight. My mind raced, connecting the dots faster than I could speak. The missing documents from my safe, the financial discrepancies at Quantum, the surveillance, it all lined up. This wasn't just some reckless affair. This was a calculated, deliberate strike at everything I had built. "What about Ryan?" I asked, a rare crack of concern slipping into my voice. Ruby's expression softened slightly. "From what I can tell, your son's clean, but he might know more than he's letting on." Kids pick up on things, even if they don't fully understand them. I nodded, already thinking through the next steps. Keep digging. I want every secret uncovered, and sweep the house for more bugs. As Ruby left, I sank back into my office chair. The familiar creak of the leather felt foreign in a world that had suddenly become hostile. My phone buzzed again. A new message from that same unknown number, * TikTok, Jake. How much are you willing to lose, *. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white. They thought they had me backed into a corner, but they had no idea who they were messing with. A soft knock at the door snapped me back to reality. I looked up to see Ryan standing there, his broken arm in a sling, guilt and fear all over his face. "Dad," he whispered, barely loud enough to hear. I think I knew something was wrong with Mom. I should have told you sooner." For a moment, my expression softened. "Just a bit. It's okay, son. Tell me everything." Ryan hesitated before spilling it all, hushed phone calls, strange meetings, and how Lisa had suddenly taken a peculiar interest in my work. As he talked, a grim satisfaction settled in me. My boy had been paying attention. Sharp, just like a miller. "You did the right thing by coming to me now," I said, resting a hand on his uninjured shoulder. "We'll handle this together." Ryan nodded, the tension easing from his body. He trusted me completely, and I knew why. I wasn't someone you crossed lightly. Once Ryan left the room, my focus sharpened. Lisa and Steve had made their biggest mistake, they had put my family in danger. And that was something I couldn't forgive. Picking up my phone, I dialed Lauren. "Meet me at the office. It's time to go on the offensive." The following days were a flurry of action. Lauren and I worked non-stop, throwing up firewalls, monitoring every data access point, and setting traps to catch whoever was pulling the strings. Meanwhile, Ruby's investigation kept unearthing more layers of lies and betrayal. Late one night, as I was driving home, something felt off. The brakes on my car seemed sluggish, barely responding. A cold jolt of adrenaline shot through me. I knew this road like the back of my hand, had driven it countless times. Instinct kicked in, and I carefully steered the car off the road, narrowly avoiding what could have been a deadly crash. Standing on the roadside, waiting for a tow truck, my phone buzzed. It was the same unknown number. The message was simple, chilling: "Next time. You won't be so lucky." The message stared back at me, but instead of fear, a cold smile crept across my face. They had just made their final mistake. Now, it was my turn. The next morning, I sat in my office, facing Lauren and Ruby. The tension in the room was thick, almost suffocating. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "They tried to kill me last night," I said bluntly. "Messed with my brakes." Lauren went pale, shock written all over his face. Ruby, though, simply nodded, as if this confirmed something she had already suspected. "So, what's our next move?" Lauren asked, trying to keep his voice steady. A gleam flickered in my eyes as the plan formed, sharp and precise. "We set a trap," I said. "Feed them false intel about a deal, something big, something irresistible." Ruby leaned forward, her interest piqued. "What kind of deal?" "A merger," I replied, letting the idea take shape out loud. "One that would triple Quantum's value overnight. It'll be the kind of inside information someone would kill for. They'll come to steal it, and when they do, we'll be ready." As we hashed out the details, I felt the adrenaline begin to pulse through me. The game was almost at its final move, and I had every intention of winning. Lisa, Steve, and whoever else was pulling their strings had no idea what they were walking into. Jacob Miller was on the hunt now, and there would be no mercy. The energy in the office buzzed with intensity. I stood by the window, gazing out over the city's skyline, feeling every bit like a predator, ready to strike. Behind me, Lauren and Ruby were poised, grim but focused. "It's time," I said, turning to them with a firm nod. "Let's spring the trap." The plan was as elegant as it was lethal. We leaked information about a fake cash transaction that was supposedly going down at my house, a huge sum of money, the perfect bait. It was exactly the kind of lure that would draw Lisa and Steve in. Now, it was just a matter of waiting. As the night settled in, my home transformed into a fortress of surveillance. Cameras hidden in every corner, microphones tuned to the slightest noise. Upstairs, Lauren watched the feeds like a hawk, ready to give the signal at the first sign of movement. I paced the living room, ready for what was coming, not just to catch them in the act, but to make them pay for everything they'd done. Then, a soft beep came through the earpiece. Lauren's voice followed, calm but with an edge of urgency. Movement at the back gate. 2 figures approaching. Right on time. My lips curled into a cold smile as I slipped into the shadows of my study. Seconds stretched into what felt like minutes, each one bringing us closer to the final confrontation. Then, the faint sound of a lock being picked cut through the silence. My hand tightened around the grip of the gun I kept tucked inside my jacket, not out of fear, but anticipation. The study door creaked open, and 2 figures stepped inside, their movements careful and deliberate. I recognized them immediately. Steve's tall, broad frame moved with a clumsy boldness, while Lisa, slim and graceful, followed with the quiet precision of someone who had done this before. Steve went straight for the safe behind the painting, while Lisa headed toward the computer. "Looking for something?" My voice sliced through the darkness like a blade. They froze. In one fluid motion, I flicked on the lights and aimed my gun straight at them. Lana's face went as pale as a ghost. "Jake, please," she pleaded, desperation dripping from her voice. "Save it," I growled, my eyes narrowing. "I know everything. The embezzlement, the frame job. Did you really think you could outsmart me, Steve?" Steve, still battered and bruised from our last encounter, tried to make a desperate lunge for something inside his jacket. My finger twitched on the trigger, but before I could pull it, another voice cut through the room. "Don't move." It was Simon, his voice strong, steady. He stepped into the room, his own gun trained on Steve. The cast on his arm was gone. It had been fake all along, just part of the setup. Steve's eyes darted between the two of us, realizing just how badly he'd been outplayed. Slowly, with a resigned sigh, he raised his hands. Lana, clearly unraveling, turned to Simon with pleading eyes. "Baby, please, you don't understand." Simon didn't miss a beat. "I understand perfectly," he said coldly. "I understood when I found you with Steve. I understood when you helped him lock me in that room. And I understand now, watching you try to rob us." The shock on Lana's face was almost laughable. She had truly believed she'd fooled us both, never once considering that Simon, the son she thought she could manipulate, had been several steps ahead of her. I stepped forward, my gun still steady. "It's over," I said firmly. "The police are on their way, but before they get here, I want answers. Who are you working for?" Steve's face twisted into a sneer. "You think this ends with us? We're just the tip of the iceberg," he spat, his grin mocking. "There are people out there who want to see you destroyed. And they won't stop." Before he could finish, Simon moved like lightning, landing a punch straight into Steve's gut. Steve doubled over, gasping for air. "Answer the question," Simon demanded, his voice cold and determined. But before Steve could speak, Lana made her move. With a desperate cry, she lunged at me, reaching for the gun in my hand. Time slowed down. I saw the wild, frantic look in her eyes, her hand stretching toward the weapon. In that split second, I made my decision. The gunshot echoed through the room, loud and final. Lana staggered backward, clutching her shoulder as blood seeped through her fingers, staining her expensive blouse a deep crimson. "Dad," Simon's voice trembled, a mix of shock and disbelief. My face remained cold, unyielding. "She made her choice," I said, my tone firm. There was no room for regret. Not anymore. The wail of sirens filled the air, growing louder by the second. Steve, sensing his last chance to escape slipping away, made a desperate grab for Lana's purse, likely trying to snatch something crucial. But Simon was faster. He tackled Steve to the ground just as the police burst through the door. What followed was a whirlwind of chaos. Paramedics rushed in to tend to Lana, police officers restraining Steve, detectives asking a flurry of questions. Through it all, I stood motionless, my gaze locked on Lana and Steve as they were led away in handcuffs, their faces a mix of defeat and bitterness. When the dust finally settled, Simon approached me, his expression weary but resolved. "It's really over, isn't it?" I nodded, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders for the first time in weeks. "It's over." Simon managed a faint smile, though I could see the sadness behind it. "I just wish it hadn't come to this." I looked at him, seeing the man my son had become through all of this. "Me too, son. But you did good. You did what needed to be done." Simon gave a small nod, his eyes reflecting both the relief of victory and the sorrow of the price we had to pay. I placed a reassuring hand on Simon's shoulder, giving him a firm grip. "They made their choices," I said, my voice steady. "Now, they face the consequences." As the first light of dawn crept over the city, I stood in my study, surveying the aftermath of everything that had unfolded. The room felt oddly quiet, like the calm after a violent storm. Lauren and Ruby joined me, their faces a blend of relief and grim satisfaction. "The board is going to want answers," Lauren said, breaking the silence. I nodded. "They'll get everything, the dirty details, the truth. It's time to clean house, root out any other threats still hiding in the company." Ruby stepped forward, handing me a thick file. "This should help," she said. "Everything I uncovered about their operation, including some names you'll want to look into." I took the file, flipping through the pages, my mind already buzzing with plans. This was no longer just about protecting quantum innovations. It was about sending a message: no one crossed Jacob Miller and got away with it. Months passed, and the trial became a media sensation. Every scandalous detail of Lisa and Steve's betrayal was plastered across headlines. I testified, my words measured and calculated, laying out the full scope of their deceit, supported by irrefutable evidence. When the verdict came back, guilty on all counts, I didn't feel joy or satisfaction, just the cold certainty that justice had been served. In the aftermath, quantum innovations didn't just survive, it thrived. The board, impressed by how I handled the crisis, granted me even greater control over the company. We implemented new security protocols, turning the business into a digital fortress, impenetrable to anyone foolish enough to try again. Simon, having proven himself through the ordeal, took on a larger role within the company. Together, we rebuilt what had been threatened, creating something even more formidable than before. One evening, Simon and I stood in my office, gazing out over the city, the skyline aglow with the lights of the night. Simon turned to me, his voice quieter than usual. "Do you ever regret how things ended with Mom?" I kept my eyes on the horizon, my expression unreadable. "Regret is a luxury we can't afford, Simon. She made her decisions, and we made ours. What matters now is moving forward." Simon nodded, absorbing the hard truth in my words. We had weathered the storm, betrayal, espionage, and everything in between. And not only had we come out on top, but we had emerged stronger than ever. The Miller legacy was intact, tempered by fire and strengthened by hardship. As night fully descended over the city, I allowed myself a small smile. I had faced my enemies, defended what was mine, and emerged victorious. If anyone dared to challenge me again, they'd soon learn that crossing Jacob Miller was a mistake they would regret for the rest of their lives. And with that, our story comes to a close. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for your time, and if you enjoyed the story, don't forget to subscribe. Click the video on the screen, and I'll see you in the next one.